I've noticed this growing trend going to the movie theater recently, where more indie movies have been making it to the big screen, and that's no coincidence. Movies are changing because movie-goers are changing. This can be seen in Garesh Shambhu's Manifesto for a New Cinephile, where he argues that the pleasures at the heart of the old cinephiles are predominantly aesthetic. The new cinephilia has a broader definition of pleasure. It values the aesthetic experience of cinema, but it demands more. I've noticed 3 trends in the film industry that stem from this, and the first is A24 Studios, a studio that follows a more indie approach to making films than more reputable companies, has grown in popularity lately because of this change. Additionally, some companies have struggled to keep up with young viewers, not only because of their distribution methods, but also because of the content that they've been airing. This is because the largest change that the industry is going to see is a growing importance on the image of both the shows and the channels and the companies. Because there's a growing importance on the image that companies have, many companies are making efforts to distribute indie films. Indie films on average are going to be more socially conscious than other content, and that's going to improve the image of these companies. Indie films can have minority directors telling unique minority stories, things that big summer blockbusters in the past just haven't done. And this is where these films come into play. Take, for example, the latest smash hit, Everything Everywhere All at Once. You have a unique story telling of an Asian American family. This is causing for many streaming services and networks to race to acquire this kind of content, not only just to promote their brand image, but to increase viewership on their channels. Not only does acquiring indie content benefit the company by having increased social representation and equitability, but it's also going to lead to this next change. That's right. Since we're talking about the business of the media industry, it's going to be really hard not to talk about money. According to Backstage.com, the average cost of producing a major studio movie is around $65 million. In comparison, a typical indie film could cost less than $2 million to make, a giant cut from that original $65 million. Even in extreme examples of indie movies, such as the aforementioned Everything Everywhere All at Once, the budget was only $20 million. That's still less than your average major studio movie. With a budget of only around $20 million, but a box office of $140 million, this is not only more profitable to companies, but it also decreased the risks when producing a film. Lower risk films, such as indie films, are going to be better for investors because there's less likely of a chance that they're going to lose their money. Since many new moviegoers actually put more emphasis on the story itself rather than the visual aesthetics of the film, it's possible to have cheaper movies that are just as good as the summer blockbusters. In comparison, let's look at Disney's 2020 remake of Mulan. The budget of the film was $200 million, a whopping amount. And yet in the box office, it only made $70 million. Ultimately, when you're making a film, you take the risk of knowing that it's either going to be a smash hit in the box office, or it's going to tank, or somewhere in between there. But when it comes to investors and putting that much money into a film, it's much easier to have a cheaper film that might do well in the box office, but if it doesn't, you're not losing much money. It's great that new films are going to have greater representation for all people, but that may not be the best case in every case. Tokenism can be defined as the practice of making only a perfunctory or symbolic effort to do a particular thing, especially by recruiting a small number of people from underrepresented groups in order to give the appearance of sexual or racial equality within a workplace. The inclusion of minority groups in cinema is great, but when you choose only to do it for the sake of doing it, this can do more harm than it can good. In the modern day, a lot of these examples can be seen in the inclusion of the LGBTQIA+ community in many movies. Many movies have stereotypical gay characters such as the gay best friend. While having these tropes in your movie do include people from the LGBTQ community, it can do harm as it promotes these stereotypes. The next generation should see strong and empowered characters from all backgrounds, including race, ethnicity, gender, and sexuality, without having to think about what makes them different. True inclusion in cinema is going to come from indie films, where we have stories by all kinds of people, for all kinds of people. And this is ultimately going to change the business of media forever.